Afternoon, and welcome back to Jeff and the Rabbi. Glad we can make it back in January here after the break. Huge break we had here. Well, tough week last week. Tough week for the world. Tough week for Jews. In Paris, as everyone knows, we had 12 members, people at the press there that were killed at Charlie Hebdo, and then 4 people killed in a kosher restaurant, all by Islamic terrorists. And we're at the point here where we've got to realize maybe the world has to wake up a little bit. Maybe it's time to say that Islam is at a war with the West. Now, I know what everybody's saying here. Hold on. We all watch the news. You forgot about that either preamble or postscript where you have to say, and this is the mandatory thing in all the channels, wait. The majority of Islam, the majority of Muslims are good people. And they are, and I give you that. The majority of them are God-fearing good people that go to work and live their lives. They're all good people, the majority of them all. And I'll make that statement here because you have to make it or you get in trouble if you don't make that statement. And let's say that there's 1.6 billion Muslims in the world, and if 80% of them are good, which is about what we're standing, that's 1.3 billion good Muslims,
right,
all over the world.
Which only leaves.
The problem is, if you take the calculator and flip them over the other way, there's about 320 million bad Muslims. That's about the size of the United States of America.
Right.
So about the size of the largest superpower on earth. There is an army of people, an army of Muslims that want to kill us. They want to kill Jews. They want to kill the people in the West. But most of the world is too politically incorrect to even mention that. In fact, the President of the United States says it's just a few bad apples, a few bad people. I don't consider the size of the United States of America's population just a few people. And
by the way, not that just a few bad people, they're very attractive. There's a certain element of people in the world that are attracted to them. So they're not shrinking.
No,
the numbers are growing all the time because there's all kinds of people out there that are really turning on to this concept.
Because I think what it is this side, these people that want to kill us, have a plan, have a good plan, and they're doing very well with it. Where the other side is, we're not even accepting that these people are at war with us, so we're definitely not at war with them. And especially for Jews, this bothers me, because the big slogan of the Jews, what is it? We'll never forget. Never again. And the world agrees that never again are we going to let this happen. But anybody who understands history knows that in 1933, after probably the 3rd attempt, Hitler and the Nazi Party got elected to power in Germany with a minority vote. They were the minority. They did not have, the majority of Germans did not vote for the Nazis. So the small minority of Germans that voted for the Nazis won, and we all know what happened. The Nazis took over. Then the great men of the West, of the left and the West, like Chamberlain came and said, we can make peace with these people. It's no problem. Very similar kind of to John Kerry and Barack Obama. The mullahs in Iran, yes, they're building nuclear weapons, but we'll go ahead and cut their sanctions because we know that they're going to stop building them. Now, there's not one person in the world that believes that anyone in Iran is going to live up to any agreement, but we can have peace in our time, just like we had back in Germany.
And by the way, in Germany, that call them the silent majority, since the Nazis were the minority, the silent majority never, ever stood up and said anything. Obviously, what the Nazis stood for was not enough of an anathema to the rest of the population that they would stand up and do anything about it.
And that's the biggest point. They were good Germans. They went to church. They did whatever they did. But the problem is, no, they didn't vote for Hitler. Once Hitler and the Nazis came into power, they said, and this is a standard answer in Germany. Well, how could you support this guy? Listen, it's going to be fine. He needs to say all this stuff about the Jews and all these things about that. He'll get over that once we get back into power. Once we take over the world, he's going to be a great leader. And then, of course, they took over Austria and Sudetenland and Czechoslovakia and Poland. Things are going pretty well.
Right.
And they didn't say a word. And those good Germans who stood silent were the reason why, in the end, about 50 million people around the world died. 6 million of them Jews, as they all stood quiet.
And a lot of those people who stood quietly by, I would venture to say, felt some positive, some advantages, some inspiration by what the Nazis were doing. They liked the growth of the country and its power.
We're going back to work. The Rhineland was remilitarized. People, they were on top again. Germans were, after the humiliation of World War I, communism was gone. They were marching in other countries. Yeah, they turned to they liked it probably until the day the first bombs dropped on Hamburg, Cologne, Dresden, and Berlin, and millions of innocent civilians, these good Germans got killed because they stood silently by. And that's the way it works in the world, but we swore we would never forget. So when we have, I have to say, mainly politicians of the left, who will not allow us in this country, we are not allowed to say that there is a Muslim problem in the world. We're not allowed to say, our president won't even say this was a Muslim attack.
Right.
What do we do? How do we stop this? Because listen, anyone who is clear-minded enough to look at history knows where this is going.
Right.
It's not going to end well. If we don't fight sometime in the near future, it's not going to end well. What do we do?
Well, I focused this whole thing on one word. I think there's one key word, and I want to make this word the battleground. The battleground, the key word is senseless.
Senseless.
The president said, and other people have said, I heard the girlfriend of the editor-in-chief of the Charlie Hebdo said it's senseless. They don't understand, like, you know, these guys are just drawing cartoons. Why would anyone want to kill them? It's senseless.
Right.
Well, it's not senseless. It makes a lot of sense. You have to understand it. You may not like it. You may hate it. You might even want to kill it. But it's not senseless. It makes sense, right? You disagree with it, but it makes sense. Just like, for example, to say that the Nazis were senseless is a huge, huge blunder. You have to understand them. You have to understand what they believe in, what their philosophy is, what motivates them to do what they do, and therefore you will understand what you have to take a stand against. But until you do that, like for example, talking Nazis just for a moment, what is Aryanism? The supremacy of the Aryan race. Well, you have to understand that. What does that mean if you think that, and what will you do therefore because of that? And then once you understand that, and you understand how they make sense according to certain truths that they have posited, you may disagree with those truths, but you have to say it makes sense. If you say X, then that follows Y, then that follows Z. Now I understand this guy. Now I understand that because I don't say X, then therefore I have to stop him because that will lead to Y and that will lead to Z, and Z generally means he's going to kill me.
And that clearly makes sense if you follow that algebraic equation that you just did there, right?
So you got to understand the sense of it. You know, and the truth is, I think that we do have to understand the sense of these guys, the sense of these Muslims in general, and the sense of the extremists, because, you know, when you say an extremist, well, there has to be a position that can be taken to the extreme.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, it has to have a starting point that can be taken to the extreme. You know, I mean, there's got to be something that it turns into. You know. So you have to first understand the position, Islam. Then you have to understand how they take it to the extreme. Now, as far as these cartoonists goes, for example, the truth is, the cartoonists could potentially be viewed as heroes if they understood that they were actually fighting a war against an evil. If they think that they're just drawing cartoons, then these guys are really crazy. It's ludicrous. And I believe much of the West says, oh, they're just drawing cartoons. Now, you have to understand, this is really crucial. There are people in the world, and this is very important to understand, there are people in the world that believe in things. And they believe in things so much, and it is so much a part of them that they're willing to give their lives for them. And there's really only one way to counteract people who are willing to die for what they believe in. Only by people who are willing to die for what they believe in,
right,
will the people who are willing to die for what they believe in be quelched. That's it. That's it. So if you don't really understand them, you don't understand, for example, you have to understand that this guy believes in the Prophet Muhammad. The Prophet Muhammad is his life. It means everything to him. It is more important to him than any freedoms or his sexual orientation or anything. It is the most important thing in the world to him. And he believes that it's his duty as a upstanding believer to stand up for his belief. So if you draw a critical picture of his prophet,
right,
then his obligation is to stand up and try to kill the person who did that. Now, if there are people that believe that you have a right to draw a picture about that prophet, they have to understand that they are taking their lives in their hands. And as a matter of fact, if they did understand that, I would call them warriors in a war, and I would applaud them. The pity is that they don't perceive themselves as warriors. You know, they didn't realize that they truly are taking their lives in their hand, and they're going out in the front line and fighting against an evil and trying to show that this evil and this belief that this guy has is absolutely phony. But you do have to understand your opponent. So you have to be a warrior. It makes a lot of sense. There is a fundamental belief. Look at Islam. I am not an Islamic expert, but there is obviously some points that have to do with the fact that a country, once it is under domination of Islam, is not allowed to tolerate other religions to exist. Right. You know, there are no other religions. You can't open up a synagogue or a church in Saudi Arabia.
Nope.
It is not tolerated by the government. You can't go to an Islamic-controlled country and practice openly another religion. It's not tolerated. If you happen to believe that other religions should be tolerated, you're going to really have to get up and say to the guy that won't tolerate, I'm going to have to kill you. Because you're killing me, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to kill you.
And you make it an interesting and extremely valid point. The problem I see in the Western world, especially in the left of the Western world, is either we don't understand what you just said, or we're not willing to understand what you just said. And I honestly don't know which one it is. If you take the left, and I think in America is a perfect example, we have a president who clearly understands Islam. He spent part of his life in the Islamic world. He went to a midrashim when he was a child. He understands Islam. Does he not get what you just said?
I believe that he does get it. I believe that this is my take. Everyone's got their take. No one really knows the guy. I've never really had a chance to sit and schmooze with him.
Right.
But I do believe that he views this country and the history of this country and his place now in the history of this country as righting the wrongs of this country, which is that there was a dominant religion and a dominant power structure, which was closely identified with that religion, Christianity, which brought about a lot of pain and suffering and built itself up on the backs of little people, enslaved people, oppressed people, took away money from people for the purpose of this sort of big religious political machine. And his job is to rectify that.
I understand what you're saying.
That's what he lives for. That's what he's there for. He's there to make sure that everybody has an education, everybody has medical care, and everybody. And if he can limit or pull the teeth of the big, powerful government, he's there to do that also.
But even and this is where I agree with what you're saying, but I'm still a little confused on the ultimate purpose of the president and people like him. They do know and they do understand clearly when they're negotiating with Iran, for example, on their nuclear desires. They have to clearly understand that they can negotiate as much as they want, and there's nothing they can do that's going to stop Iran from building a nuclear weapon. Part of their agreement is they're allowing them to have the centrifuges already. So does Barack Obama, do the people of the left, and I can't just say Barack Obama anymore, do the people of the left of this country, do they want the destruction of Israel?
Having spent your entire life dedicated to hating the abuse of power by the United States government and its society, they are loath to exercise that power because they're there to limit that. They hate that power. They're totally against it. You know, this is, to tell you the truth, I can bring a certain analogy. The Christian church for centuries has given the Jewish people a really hard time.
Right.
It's really difficult for Jews to feel cozy, even if maybe times have changed and the Christians are now perhaps more allies. Many Protestant denominations perhaps are more allied with Jewish people. It's really hard for Jewish people to feel so cozy with them because we're so in this mindset of 10 centuries of unremittent pain and suffering.
Good example.
So it's hard to change tracks and say, okay, but now you're my friend, and now I hate the other guy. So even if I do find that, let's say, Jews and Christians perhaps are both hated by Muslims, it still is really difficult for me to get too cozy with Christians because, I've got just 10 centuries of pain. And I think that's where Obama and his administration, they can't exercise power because they hate that power.
So it's a good point. It puts us in a really big dilemma in the West. And because I agree with everything you say, and I agree with your saying about Islam, you have to understand it. This is not a far stretch for them, what they're doing here. This is what they do. This is who they are. And if you happen to be, as you said, an extremist, you have to start from somewhere. And these people are extreme. So, again, the question is, what do we do as Jews? What do we do as people of the West to somehow, and I want to say fight this war, because it is a war. I mean, listen, if someone declares war on you, whether you want war or not, there's a war declared on you. So what do you do?
Yeah, so by the way, the West can look forward to this phenomenon increasing because there is a percentage of the population, and perhaps even a growing percentage of the population, that is disaffected, that finds the rampant liberalism of the West and its unstructured nature of its society deeply unsettling, and yearns for direction, restriction, and moral guidance in life. So there are a lot of people out there, like these terrorists, who just love the whole ISIS idea.
Right.
They love the violence of it, the black and white nature of it. They love the right and wrong of it. They love the fact that you live in a world where you can't accept things that you don't like. You just take action against them. They love that. And it's going to continue to appeal to a lot of people until ultimately any society that wants to live and tolerate it will realize it's not tolerable. You got to get rid of it. I once upon a time had a friend who was a holistic healer, doctor, whatever you want to call it, and stayed away from all chemicals and everything, right? So one time I met the guy and said, what are you doing here? So he said, my family and I were staying at this motel. So I said, what are you doing? Why are you staying in a motel? It was like right here in town. I know he lives here in town. What are you staying in a motel for? So he said, we had to call an exterminator and, exterminate the house. So I said, you bring all those chemicals into your house? It's like I was totally against chemicals. I mean, isn't there some holistic thing that you can put out that So he said, I tried all this stuff and it didn't work, and the house was just totally overrun with all these insects, and we just had to give in and call a guy and wipe them out. Right. He tried everything he could to avoid it, but ultimately he had to bite the bullet and say forget it. We got to wipe them out. I want to live with the cockroaches, and I want to understand them, and I am a cockroach, and be with the cockroaches, and certainly not because the fact that I would be killing them would actually poison me, because the chemicals that I would use on them are actually a poison to me, and I don't want to engage. I don't want to go down to their destructive level. I want to understand them, live at ease with them, and ultimately he said, but I can't live because they're all over the place.
So eventually, this guy's out there waterboarding his cockroaches. Is what's going on. Is happening.
Right. So he just say call it the nuclear option.
Boom.
So that's it. Call the exterminator. Chemicals. I want all the chemicals.
So pretty much what we're saying here in that very good example is, we're eventually going to have to decide as a country, as a people, as the West, we can't have this anymore because we can't survive with them, and they can't survive with us.
And by the way, this guy, he in the end had to use a ton more of the chemicals that he hated,
and probably kill a lot more
in his house, because they had totally taken over. Had he used a little bit of the chemical in the very beginning, he probably could have kept him at bay. But he didn't want to do it, was loath to do it. And ultimately, what will happen in this society if this type of thing starts showing up more and more? And when people in the United States are turning on their news and they're hearing about, not Paris, but they're hearing about Chicago.
You're right.
They're hearing about Atlanta. It's not going to take too long where people are going to say, we demand some action. And you know what's going to happen then? In order to do that, the government is going to really have to strip everyone of their civil liberties, because the government's going to have to say, okay, we got to go find these guys, right, and therefore we're going to take all your data, and we're going to go into anybody's house, and no one's going to be, and everyone is going to lose a ton of civil liberties, because they're trying so hard to maintain all the civil liberties and respect all these people, that in the end, in order to really uproot them, which everyone's going to demand, they're going to have to.
Eventually we'll have to.
There will be millions of people in the street, and what they'll do is some political candidate will come along and he will say, this is intolerable, and if you elect me, I will see that we get rid of these guys, and they'll elect them.
I mean, the interesting thing about this is this is not new. I mean, it might be new with Islam, and even though it's not new with Islam. This has happened over and over and over again in history. I mean, especially, and I always go back to the 1930s in Germany. It's such a obvious comparison right now of what you're going to have to do. Listen, they could have stopped Hitler when he militarized the Rhineland. He came in without bullets in his guns. He could have been stopped right then. That was against the Versailles Treaty. He could have stopped him in Austria. They could have stopped him in the Sudetenland. They probably could have stopped him in Czechoslovakia, who had the largest standing army in Europe. And they didn't.
And by the way, what really brought him to power? There was chaos in the streets. There's chaos in the streets of Germany.
I don't blame them for wanting to defeat communism.
Everything was going on. Crime was rampant. Like, there was all kinds of immorality. People felt unsafe in their country. And this guy came along and he said, I will bring back law and order. Or like, Mussolini said, I'll get the trains to run on time.
They both did that.
And they did. And people voted for them on that platform. So that's what the guy offered. But like, you could do it now, or you can do it later. But when you do it later, all the things that you're trying to hang on to now are going to be for sure lost, because there'll be no way to maintain any civil liberties at that point, because it'll be so out of hand that everyone will have to lose all their civil liberties just in order to wipe them out.
It's a shame that we don't learn from history, and it's a shame that we do forget, because this is going to be an issue. Now, not to throw a little softball over to get back into your court, but because I was thinking about this last night, we go back to the times of the Torah. The times, we have Jacob, before that we have Abraham, and obviously he has Ishmael, and he has Isaac. Mm-hmm. And that's where it starts, and it starts down with Ishmael. Is this supposed to happen right now? I mean, because listen, if you're one of the good Muslims, you got to look at it and say, listen, but we're killing people. They're killing people all the time. Why does this not make sense to the people of Ishmael?
The religion is very interesting. Ishmael is laid out on a collision course with the world from the very beginning. It says the classic lines that we learn about Ishmael, and we have mentioned this before right here. One of them is, it is prophesied about Ishmael, Yado bakol v'yad kol bo. His hand is in everything, and everyone's hand is in him. He mixes it up. He's in everyone's face, right? It says, Al panei kol echav yishkon. He's in everyone's face. The problem with Ishmael is that he cannot contain himself. Right. He can't live peacefully with other people. He has to be in your face until the point that he has to be dealt with. He has to be dealt with because he cannot be at all contained. He can't live, because he's a wild man. That's what it says. Para Adam. Torah calls him a wild man. So we look back to our understanding of wild man. Wild man is really difficult to contain. A not wild man, for example, might want to harm someone else, but he also wants to preserve himself.
Right.
A wild man will die. Like, he likes to die for his cause. Maybe it even appeals to him to die for his cause. Very difficult to deal with. Wild man does things that are unpredictable, audacious, and outrageous, hard to plan against, hard to fight against. These are all the traits of Ishmael. And people who are attracted to Ishmael, taken to its radical extreme, are really totally crazy and unpredictable. So it's very difficult to fight. The world may find that it will have to actually eradicate the religion. And that is, what everyone's, I love the religion, it's good and all. The world may find it'll have to be eradicated. This should be no news to a student of history. In 732, there was a Battle of Tours.
Yep.
And at that point...
The Moors at Tours, I remember learning that one.
That's the Moors at Tours. And they had crossed into France. They came across North Africa. They took over Spain, the Muslims. They headed into France. If they had won the Battle of Tours, they would have taken over the world. Yep. But instead, they lost that battle. So they retreated, and then they retreated even further, and ultimately they were squeezed out of Spain and just went back to North Africa. On the other side, they had gotten as far as Vienna. They were at the gates of Vienna, and then they were beaten back. They didn't go home, and no one called off the fight. It's just been basically a stalemate. Like what do we have in the Korea? It's called the
30th parallel.
Right, and they never settled the war.
Right.
The war never was settled. No one ever surrendered to the other one. They never made a peace treaty. There was what is it, an armistice?
I don't know if it's an armistice. I don't know what you would even call it, but yeah.
Which means okay, we still hate each other. We want to kill each other. We're just not actively fighting right now. Right? That's what happened with Islam. But they never called it off. And so now it's flaring up again. The world should not be surprised.
No, the Torah got that one pretty right there, didn't they?
Yeah, these are great trends, and ultimately will lead to great war. As far as the Jewish people goes, the Jewish people will remain, interestingly enough, the flashpoint. They will always be the flashpoint. This guy,
we're good at that.
They did their satirical cartoons. So they hated those satirical cartoons. They went in there and they killed the guys that made those cartoons. Very understandable. The guys who were writing those cartoons, had they appreciated what they were doing, should have understood that if you want to attack something that the other guy holds very dear, which again, I happen to believe in the rights of people who hold things dear, and I also believe that if it's wrong, you can attack it. But understand that you're putting your life on the line, and all the power to you if you're willing to put your life on the line, and I believe that should be protected, but they put their life on the line, and they were killed for it. Very nice. They're heroes in a certain way. So the guy reacts to that. What does he do? Goes to a Jewish kosher grocery store. That's logical. Again, if you say, well, that was senseless. That's not senseless. We have to understand why, to them, if you want to make a point, the way you make a point is you go kill people in a kosher grocery store.
I'm going to have to disagree here. CNN said that, and this is almost a quote, that even though it was a kosher restaurant, it had nothing to do with them being Jewish that they went in there, because even Muslims go to the Jewish thing, and a lot of international people, so they didn't feel it had anything to do with anybody being Jewish.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So I just thought I'd throw that out there, because CNN's
right.
where I get.
You mean the guy, first of all, happened to be in a Jewish neighborhood. Yes. The guy just happened to be in a Jewish neighborhood.
Came in there.
Went into the first grocery store he ran into. They could have been at Kroger's or Publix, but he happened to just bump into
That's what CNN said. He said a lot of international people go there, Muslims go there, it had nothing to do with being Jewish.
Yep.
Okay, so I just thought I'd throw that out there.
Nothing. Okay. Right. Okay. That is a desperate attempt to keep it senseless.
Yes.
That is the senseless group. So again, if I can just sum it all up, to me, senseless is the word, because once it's senseless,
you're right.
That means you don't look into it. And there's no sense looking into it, no sense understanding underlying causes, because it's senseless. Okay? Wow. So now I can go about my life and approaching things my way, and it's just senseless, and I don't have to deal with it. However, those of us that want to try to make sense of it and find out that there is a very logic, it does make sense based on a certain mindset, and if you understand the mindset and understand how it makes sense, then you will understand the danger of it, what it means to you, and what you're going to have to do to fight it. From a Jewish perspective, we understand it. It makes sense. We know about Yishmael. We know about what he wants. We know about what he's going to get, and we know about how he's going to go about getting it. It makes a lot of sense. And we also realize that that's not tolerable, and it's not going to last in the end. that is going to have to be defeated in order for the world to be a good place.
So I think Rabbi Friedman makes the point here, and I think maybe it's a wake-up call to the world to try to make sense of Islam, because there is a sense and there's a rhyme and there's a reason to Islam, and there's a rhyme and a reason to what's going on in this world. And I think it's the duty of everyone out there to try to make sense of this.
Right.
All right, well, hopefully, God willing, next week we'll come back with a better, nicer, happier
story. Like to hear some good news.
Good news, something good next week.
Yeah.